with Geico, we can easily bundle.
And we are in. What's good? What's good? Zerilath Eternal. Rolling some Orbit Culture. Not the new Orbit Culture. I like it. I like it. Just didn't feel. Just wasn't in the mood to play it. I'm not like a guy. I'm not. I'm not picking songs because I'm interested in trends. I'm just like, this is my vibe check at the moment. This is how I'm flowing. And I got two more songs stacked up. We'll see how long this goes. This is going to be 16 pages tonight. Welcome, Howard. Thank you for being present in the chat. Good to see you. Thank you, those that will be listening. I hit 600 subs today. So, um, nothing special. Just a milestone to mark. Anyway, so let's let's open her up. And today we are going to be in chapter 5 about Herod's murder of his heir and death. So I guess Herod also dies here. Because I don't believe the whole book is Herod. I remember looking at the chapters briefly, and Herod is a couple of chapters. So, Antipater, now undisputed heir, had called down on his own head the utter loathing of the nation, for everyone knew that all the slanders directed against his brother had originated with him, and he was filled with secret but terrible fear when he saw the dead men's children growing up. Glaphyra had borne Alexander 2 sons, Tigranes and Alexander. Bernice, Salome's daughter, had borne Aristobulus' 3 sons, Herod, Agrippa, and Aristobulus, and 2 daughters, Herodias and Mariamna. Glaphyra, Herod sent back to Cappadocia with her dowry after the execution of Alexander. Aristobulus' his widow, Bernice, he married to the brother of Antipater's mother. It was to placate the hostility of Salome that Antipater arranged his marriage. He tried also to get round Pheroras with gifts and other attentions, and round Caesar's friends by sending large moneys to Rome. Saturninus and his staff in Syria all received more than enough of his presents, but his gifts made him the more hated, as it was obvious they were not spontaneous expressions of generosity, but insurances against foreseen dangers. Foreseen, not unforeseen, but foreseen, okay? That's what it says here. I don't know if that's a typo or not. I'm used to hearing the word unforeseen much of the time. The result was that while the recipients liked him no better than before, those to whom he gave nothing became more bitter enemies. Yet he made his largesse daily more lavish, as he saw the king negatively his efforts by taking care of the orphans and showing his remorse for the murder of his sons by his tenderness towards their little ones. One day Herod assembled his counselors and gentlemen, set the children before them, and with brimming eyes began the fathers of these children. With brimming eyes began. The fathers of these children were snatched from me by some malignant spirit. They themselves are commended to my care, both by natural ties and by pity for their orphanhood. I will try, though I have been most unfortunate as a father, at any rate to show myself a more devoted grandfather, and when I die, to leave in charge of them those most dear to me. I betroth your daughter, Pheroras, to the elder of Alexander's 2 boys, and so make you automatically his guardian, and to your son Antipater I give Aristobulus' daughter, so that you will become father to the orphaned girl. Her sister, my own Herod, shall have, since on his mother's side he had a high priest for grandfather. Let my wishes be carried out in this way, and let no one who cares for me go against them. I pray God to seal these unions to the good of my kingdom and of my descendants, and to look with gentler eyes on these little children here than he ever looked on their fathers. And now the tears flowed faster, and he joined the children's hands. Then, after warmly embracing each in turn, he dismissed the gathering. His decision struck a sudden chill into Antipater, who made no attempt to hide his mortification. He felt that the honor shown by his father to the orphans meant the end of his hopes, and that his prospects of succession would again be in danger, if not only Archelaus, but Pheroras, a tetrarch, supported Alexander's heirs. He thought of the nation's hatred for himself and compassion for the orphans of the devotion of the Jews had felt for his brothers while they lived, and their tender memories of them now, that thanks to him they were dead. So he made up his mind by fair means or foul to break these betrothals. He was afraid to try any tricks on a father so difficult and so prone to suspicion. So he took the bull by the horns and asked him direct not to rob him of the honor already conferred or to give the name of king to him. But once again, took the bull by the horns, right? That's another translation for the parlance of our time. Probably Josephus was using parlances of his time. He probably used an expression that would have been the equivalent, like, like he stuck his hand to the something or something that just like, what the hell does that mean, right? Anyway. Unless, of course, they have been saying that expression, and that is technically what he said. It would be funny if it was, because, I mean, like, obviously, bulls existed back then and all that. The power to others. He would never be in control if with Archelaus as his grandfather, Alexander's son should also have Pheroras as his father-in-law. As the royal family was so large, would he please reconsider the proposed marriages? The king, indeed, had 9 wives and children by 7 of them. Antipater himself was the son of Doris, Herod of Merium, the high priest's daughter, Antipas and Archelaus of Malthace the Samaritan. Their sister, Olympias, being married to Herod's nephew Joseph. By Cleopatra of Jerusalem, he had Herod and Philip, and by Pallas Fazel. Cleopatra of Jerusalem. Would this be a different Cleopatra? Was Cleopatra not an exclusive name to one character of the record? Right? So that's very interesting. So, because I never knew that before, I'm actually a little bit interested. So, I am going to do a little search in real time. Let's see. Cleopatra of Jerusalem. Okay. Cleopatra of Jerusalem. All right. What does Wikipedia want to say about it? All right. Was a woman who lived in the 1st century BC during the Roman Empire. She was the 5th wife of the king of Judea, Herod the Great. Okay. She looks like every other woman of the Dark Ages, with the whole wrap around the head kind of situation. Just like, we weren't that different from Islam back then. I mean, like, you had style. It wasn't, like, about living in, like, I don't know, shame or whatever. Women got really wrapped up. Anyway. All right, so Cleopatra of Jerusalem, let's see. Okay, all right, hold on. There's a passage here about it. So there's a possibility that Cleopatra could have been a daughter of a local noble from Jerusalem. She was born and raised in the city and could have been of Jewish or Edomite Phoenician origins. Cleopatra was called Cleopatra of Jerusalem to distinguish her from Ptolemaic Greek queen Cleopatra the Seventh. Cleopatra the Seventh of Egypt. She was the seventh Cleopatra of Egypt. Okay. You know, it's interesting that her name is Cleopatra. The more I think about it, Cleopatra, in the Bach saga, as we know that the men have a Tor and the women have a Tor. The women have the Tor, right? And so she is the Patra. Patra is like Padre, Peter, Pater. So we're talking, patriarch. Right, so she is the Clee of the father. That's technically what the etymology of Cleopatra would be in root language. Right, it is the Clee, which is the woman's, it's like the clitoris. Right, this is where it comes. That's where that comes from, right? So it's just one of those things you can't ignore. Context matters, obviously. Makes you wonder about Cleveland and why we call them cleavers. Why do we have those? We have a butcher's knife. A certain kind of butcher's knife is called a cleaver. Why do we call it that now? Terrible thoughts. Terrible fucking thoughts. But anyway, he had other daughters, Roxanne and Salome. The first by Phaedra, the second by Elpis. 2 wives were childless, a cousin and a niece. Apart from these, there were the 2 sisters of Alexander and Aristobulus' children of Miriam. Not included in the 9 wives. Okay. 9 wives. Interesting. Interesting that it's 9 wives. Bach saga. The Hyperborean family is established by, I think it is, I believe it was 12 males and 9 and 12 brothers, 9 sisters. I believe was the High Family Council, and then during the Paradise time with the trouble of having a family that big, it got reduced to like 9 and 7 or something like that. Each side got reduced significantly. Anyway, so this might be a footnote of the breeding system, possibly hiding here in the book by not explaining why there were 9 wives. Why were there 9? Why was it specifically 9 wives? The 2 wives were childless, a cousin and a niece. Apart from these, there were 2 sisters of Alexander and Aristobulus. The family being of such exceptional size, Antipater asked for the marriage arrangements to be reconsidered. On realizing how Antipater regarded the orphans, the king was extremely angry, and it flashed across his mind that the murdered men might also be victims of Antipater's slanders. So, for the moment, he made a long and bitter reply and sent the fellow packing. Later, however, he succumbs to his flatteries and altered the arrangements, marrying Aristobulus' daughter to Antipater himself and Phorius' daughter to his son. Like, yeah, and it's just like, what is it? Is it just about the subject matter of the book that all this is about? There's got to be a secret that Josephus doesn't know and doesn't know that he doesn't know, or is in conspiracy to not share that he happens to know, right? Because there is so much lost on the motivation that is this is about why does the nation put up with it being this way? Why do the men that make up the royal guard put up with this bullshit, right? This is what happened during some of the troubles of Rome, to the point I think it was when Rome was burning and Nero was fucking up or whatever. I think that's when they killed Nero or something and put the other guy in charge. Something to that effect. And made him do all the stuff, and basically it was the Roman guard running Rome under his rule. Something to that effect. I think they made a movie about it. All right. One second, let me chew on this. Ooh. Parmesan and garlic pita chips. Ooh. Not too unhealthy and effing delicious. How effective was his flattery in this instance? Can it be seen from Salome's failure in a like case? She was Herod's sister and was backed by Caesar's wife, Julia. Called Livia in her husband's lifetime. According to Antiquities, she opposed the marriage. Okay, interesting that they would make a name spelling pronunciation, effectively, distinction here in the footnote. In her repeated requests to marry the Arab Silas. But Herod swore he would count her his worst enemy if she did not abandon his ambition, and ended by marrying her against her will to Alexis, one of his gentlemen, and one of her daughters to Alexis's son, the other to Antipater's mother's brother. Of his own daughters, by Miriam, one wedded his sister's son Antipater, one his brother's son Phasael. Having cut off the orphans' hopes, and arranged the marriage for his personal benefit, Antipater felt that his own hopes were safely in port, and as confident now as he was wicked, became insufferable to overcome the detestation in which he was universally held was beyond him. So he relied on terror to maintain his security. He was aided by Pheroras, who had no doubts now that he would be king. There was, too, a group of women who stirred up fresh troubles at court. Pheroras' wife, with the cooperation of her mother and sister and of Antipater's mother, began to throw her weight about in the palace, even daring to affront two of the king's daughters, making him thoroughly disgusted. Though his aversions did not prevent their tyrannizing the rest. The only one who stood up to this conspiracy was Salome, who denounced the gang to the king as a danger to himself. Informed of this denunciation and of Herod's displeasure, they left off meeting openly and exchanging friendly greetings, and instead pretended to quarrel with each other in the king's hearing. Antipater joined in the pretense by publicly disagreeing with Pheroras, but they held secret meetings and caroused in the night. The watch kept over them only serving to strengthen the conspiracy, but every detail of their doings was known to Salome and duly passed on to Herod. The king blazed with anger, especially against the Pheroras' wife, whom Salome accused most vehemently. He convened a committee of his counselors and gentlemen and laid a great many things to the woman's charge, especially the affront to his daughter, accusing her also of paying money to the Pharisees to spite him and turning his brothers against him by the use of powerful drugs. Finally, he turned to Pheroras and told him he must choose one or the other, his brother or his wife. Like, I'd be very interested in seeing a movie made about these events from the point of view of, like, a spy. Like, there's a spy who, is there to do a whole thing, and before he gets to do whatever cool thing he's supposed to do in the movie, he has to wait through all this shit and be witness to it. And has to fucking, like sit there, do nothing while most of it happens. Here and there he gets a chance to influence something because maybe he sees a good person's going to get killed or something, right? Something that's, like, totally in the background of all this, just to try and paint a fucking picture of the society that is dealing with this fucking bullshit. Granted, what is it that binds them to this psychologically, right? And when do they see the problem between them? Because there's so many questions not to ask, right? Because I want the spy to be somebody who is, like, he's not just, like, hanging around the king, right? Like, because he's a spy, so he's got to have his street connections. Because he's part of, like, one of these dudes going after him or something, right? I don't know how you're going to I don't know if you're painting him as the good guy or the bad guy. I don't even know how much I want the story to necessarily be fiction or nonfiction. I just want the depiction of this fucking situation in the backdrop of the story depicted accurately, right? When Pheroras replied that he would die rather than give up his wife, Herod at a loss went off to Antipater and forbade him to hold any converse with Pheroras, his wife, or anyone connected with her. Antipater conformed with his command in public, but in secret he spent the night with them. Afraid, however, of Salome's watchful eye, he arranged through friends in Italy to visit Rome. They wrote that Antipater ought in the near future to be sent to Caesar, and without hesitation Herod sent him off with a splendid retinue, a vast sum of money, and his will, which named Antipater as the next king. And as Antipater's successor, Herod, son of Miriam, the high priest's daughter. To Rome sailed also Silas, the Arab, in disregard to Caesar's commands, and with the intention of arguing against Antipater, the case about which he had previously been arraigned by Nicolaus. There was also a serious dispute between him and Aretas, his own king, as he had executed a number of his friends, among them Saumas, the most powerful man in Petra. By a heavy bribe, he won over Fabatus, Caesar's treasurer, using his help against Herod too. But Herod, by a still heavier bribe, detached him from Silas and attempted with his aid to extract from that rogue the money Caesar had ordered him to pay. Silas would not pay a penny, and even accused Fabatus to Caesar, saying his treasurer treasured not his interests, but Herod's. Furious at this, and still high in Herod's favor, Fabatus betrayed Silas's secrets, telling the king that Silas had brought the services of his bodyguard Corinthus, on whom he must keep an eye, as Corinthus, though brought up in his kingdom, was by birth an Arab, the king took the hint and immediately arrested both him and 2 other Arabs found with him, one a friend of Silas and the other a tribal chief. Under torture, they admitted that Corinthus had given them heavy bribes to murder Herod. After further examination by Saturninus, governor of Syria, they were sent under escort to Rome. Man, he is, probably this is probably pretty normal that, like, a king may be torturing a whole bunch, this is like these guys, right? Like, this would be example of, like, maybe these guys know the character in my story, and so, like, their story comes to an end right here, and you get to know them for a little bit because he gets to survive because maybe he's, like, peeking around the corner and he witnesses them getting tortured and killed and such, right? These are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. All right. Herod maintained his relentless pressure on Pheroras to divorce his wife, but could find no means of punishing the woman, many as were his moves for hating her. Still, he lost his temper and banished her, along with her brother. Pheroras swallowed the insult and went off to his tetrarchy, swearing that the only end to his exile would be the death of Herod. Never while he lived would he go back to him. He did not return even when his brother was sick, despite the most pressing invitation. For Herod wanted to leave him certain instructions, believing himself on the point of death, but he unexpectedly recovered, and soon afterwards Pheroras fell sick. Herod showed himself less adamant. He went to him and looked after him sympathetically. But he could not master the sickness, and after a few days Pheroras died. Herod had loved him till his dying day, but for all that it was rumored that he had poisoned him. However, he conveyed the body to Jerusalem, ordered prolonged mourning by the whole nation, and honored him with the most magnificent funeral. Such was the end that came to one of the murderers of Alexander and Aristobulus. But, arising out of Pheroras' death, retribution was at last finding the true author of that crime. So probably these poisonings, probably some woman. I bet some woman got her fucking revenge, because she probably saw what was up, right, and said, I'm going to avenge these two, Alexander and Aristobulus, and I'm going to get this guy, right, because she cared, or something. Maybe this is a woman's story. Maybe it's a concubine. There you go. That's what it is. It's one of the concubines, right? So, that way it gets girl power points that make sense. Anyway. Deliberately poisoned his wife and brought him a most unusual dish, and as soon as he had eaten it, had been taken ill. 2 days earlier, her mother and sister had called in an Arab woman with knowledge of drugs to prepare a love potion for Pheroras. Instead, she gave him deadly poison at the instance of Silas, to whom she was known. Plagued with suspicions of every kind, the king put the maidservant and several free women to the torture. One of them, in her agony, cried out, "May God, the ruler of heaven and earth, visit our suffering on their author." Antipater's mother, seizing on this hint, the king went still further on his search for the truth. The woman disclosed the friendship of Antipater's mother with Pheroras and his womenfolk, and there, surreptitious meetings, she told how Pheroras and Antipater, after returning from the king, drank with them all night, rigidly excluding every servant, whether man or woman. It was one of the free women who gave this information. The slave girls Herod tortured one at a time. Their evidence in every case tallied with the already given, with the addition that it was by agreement that Antipater had gone off to Rome, Pheroras to Perea, for they had said again and again that, having disposed of Alexander and Aristobulus, Herod would be after them and their wives. After killing Miriam and her sons, he would spare no one, so it was better to put as many miles as possible between them and the beast. Again, Antipater had often grumbled to his mother that he was gray-haired already, while his father got daily younger. As likely as not, he would die without ever actually being king. Interesting. So, his father is in a state of gaining life force by his actions, and his son, or his heir to the throne or whatever, he's being life drained by these actions. Now, we all know that Herod's going to die here in the end, but I'm just saying this is very interesting the way it plays out. So, when his father died, if he ever did, his enjoyment of the succession would be terribly short, and those Hydra heads were shooting up. The sons of Aristobulus... Hold on a second, those Hydra heads are... are shooting up. The sons of Aristobulus and Alexander. He had been robbed by his father of his hopes for his children, as the personal nominated to succeed him when he died was not to be one of his own sons, but Miriam's Herod. In that respect, anyway, the king must be a complete dotard. If he imagined that in this matter his will would be carried out, he himself would see that none of the family survived. Hating his children more than any father had ever done, Herod hated his brother far more. Only a day or two ago he had given him Antipater 100 talents to hold no converse with Pheroras. When Pheroras asked, "What harm were we doing him?" he himself had replied, "I only wish he would strip us of everything and leave us to live naked. But there is no way to escape such a murderous beast, who will not even let us show affection openly. Now we shall have to meet in secret. We can do it openly if ever we have the arms and spirits of men." To these disclosures, wrung from them by the rack, they added that Pheroras had planned to fly with them to Petra. Herod believed every word because of the 100 talents, which he had mentioned to nobody but Antipater. His anger descended first on Doris, Antipater's mother. He stripped her of all the adornments he had lavished on her at fantastic expense and sent her packing a second time. Pheroras's womenfolk he made as comfortable as he could after their ordeal, having no further quarrel with them. But he was in constant terror and blazed up on the tiniest suspicion, dragging many guiltless persons off to torture for fear of missing any of the guilty. Oh, my God. So it's like on a paranoia level, he's still after them, but he doesn't have a real reason to be after them. So a lot of them get left alone. Like, this is why we don't give the head of state this much power. This is not healthy, right? It's not healthy, right? And these are living beings that are kindred. Once we get to the bottom of this page, I'm taking the break. He now turned to the Samaritan Antipater, Antipater's chief executive. Putting him on the rack, he found out that Antipater had sent one of his companions to Egypt for a noxious drug meant for him. Antipholus had handed it to Theodion, Antipater's uncle, who had passed it on to Pheroras. Pheroras being required by Antipater to assassinate Herod while he himself was at Rome out of reach of suspicion. And Pheroras had put the drug in his wife's hands. The king sent for her and commanded her to fetch that very moment what she had received. She went out as if to fetch it, but threw herself upon the roof to forestall inquisition. By the king's torturer, however, by the providence of God, who, it would seem, was resolved to punish Antipater, she did not fall on her head, but on other parts of her body, and survived. She was taken to the king, who had her revived, as she was unconscious after her fall, and pressed her for the explanation, swearing that if she told the truth, she would be immune from any punishment. But if she held anything back, he would rack her to pieces and leave nothing for burial. After a brief hesitation, the woman answered, "Well, why should I go on keeping these secrets now? Pheroras is dead. To save Antipater, who has ruined us all. Listen, your majesty, and may God listen too, and witness the truth of my words, for there is no deceiving him. When Pheroras was dying, and you sat beside him in tears, he called me to him and whispered, 'I have been badly mistaken, my dear, about my brother's attitude to me. He loves me like this, and yet I hated him, and planned to kill a man who was set terribly distressed about me, even before my death. I am only receiving what I deserve for my disloyalty, and you go and fetch the drug you are keeping to poison him with. The Antipater left with us and destroy it at once before my eyes. For fear I go to Hades with a devil on my back.'" Don't know if they use those particular words. I suspect that maybe Josephus said Hades. Thus bidden, I fetched it and emptied most of it into the fire before his eyes, but kept a little for myself in case of emergency, and because I was afraid of you. So, saying, she produced the box, containing very little indeed of the poison. The king then turned his tortures against Antiphilus, mother and brother, who both admitted that he had fetched the box from Egypt, and stated that he had obtained the drug from a brother who practiced medicine in Alexandria. The ghost of Alexander and Aristobulus were prowling around the whole palace, ferreting out hidden things and bringing them to light, and dragging those most remote from suspicion before the inquisitor. Even the high priest's daughter, Miriam, was found to be privy to the conspiracy. Torture extracted this information from her brother. The king punished the mother's criminal intention through her sons. The name of her Herod, who was to succeed Antipater, was blotted out of his father's will. On top of this, Bathyllus came under inquisition and clinched the evidence of Antipater's conspiracy. A freedman of Antipater, he brought another concoction of noxious compound of the poison of asps and the secretions of other reptiles, so that if the first drug proved ineffectual, Pheroras and his wife should be armed with this weapon against the king. As a sideline to the intended attack on the father, he brought letters forged by Antipater to incriminate his brothers. Archelaus and Philip, sons of the king at school in Rome, now adolescent and proud-spirited, determined to nip in the bud this growing danger to his hopes, Antipater forged incriminating letters in the names of their friends in Rome and bribed others to write that they regularly criticized their father, openly denouncing the fate of Alexander and Aristobulus, and protesting against their own recall, for their father had already sent for them, and this was the chief cause of Antipater's alarm. Even before his absence from the country while still in Judea, he had paid for similar incriminating letters to be written in Rome, and to avoid suspicion, had gone to his father on purpose to excuse his brother's conduct, maintaining that some of the things were untrue and others merely boyish indiscretions. Having dispersed vast sums of the writers of these incriminating letters, this task now was to cover up his tracks. So he brought up costly wardrobes, elaborate tapestries, cups of silver and gold, and many other valuables, in order that his huge expenditure under these heads might conceal the more dubious items. His accounts showed outgoings totaling 200 talents, attributed mostly to his legal battle with Silaus. All his rascalities, however small, had come to light with the major crime now that all tortures cried aloud, parricide. And the letters fracticide a second time, yet no one arriving in Rome told him what had happened in Judea, though between the discovery of his guilt and his becoming 7 months, and his homecoming 7 months went by. So great was the detestation with which all regarded him, perhaps, too, the mouths of those prepared to tell him were stopped by the ghosts of his murdered brothers. Anyway, he wrote from Rome, announcing the good news of his imminent arrival and of the honor paid him by Caesar at his final interview. You know what's crazy? I went, like, way further. I was supposed to stop at the bottom one. I just can't believe I went through two pages like that. I can't believe I just went through all that. Wow. Okay, cool. Let's take a break. Man, I'm doing I'm a little bit more spry tonight than I was last night. It was a little bit more of a struggle. I think I'm way more rested today. All right. So, and Oceans, the prophetical Mercury implement. I haven't quite heard this song yet, so this is going to be a newbie for both of us. That was cool. The music video is very interesting. There's a lot of, it's like, it's gold. There's like all this gold. It looks like that's what they're doing. It's gold. It's like there's, it looks like you've got that, you know how how you sift in a pan for gold at a creek bed. It's like a lot of like artsy shots of what seems like there's just a lot of gold in with like basically it's like the sludge water of dirt, right? And that's a lot of the aesthetic shots in the music video, and it makes me want to dive deeper into what the song is about. And they didn't post their lyrics, so I'm gonna have to go check out the lyrics for this song later because this might be some good stuff in there. Anyway. Here we are. So, itching to lay hands on the murderous scoundrel and afraid of his being forewarned and on the lookout, the king replied in a letter which suppressed his real feelings and with much slow show of affection urged him to hurry home. If he came quickly, Herod would say no more about his mother's misdoings, for Antipater was now aware of her banishment from the court. He had earlier received a tarentum, a letter describing Pheroras' death, and had made a great show of grief, which much impressed those who thought it was for his uncle. It is more likely that he was upset by the failure of the conspiracy and was weeping not for Pheroras, but for his tool, and he was already assailed by terror of what he had done. Perhaps the poison had been discovered. Now when he received in Cilicia the letter from his father mentioned above, he pushed on without delay. But as he sailed into Celenderis, he was overcome by the thought of his mother's fate, his unaided soul giving him a premonition of disaster. The more far-seeing of his gentlemen advised him not to put himself in his father's power till he knew for certain the grounds of his mother's banishment. They were afraid there might be something attached to the charges against her. The less prudent, more anxious to see their own country again than interested in Antipater's welfare, urged him to push on and not by lingering to give his father an excuse for base suspicions and his enemies a handle for slander. Even if there had been a movement against him, it was due to his absence. No one would have dared if he had been there. It was ridiculous to let doubtful suspicions deprive him of unmistakable benefits, and not to put himself as soon as possible in his father's hands to take over the kingdom, which depended on him alone. It was to these advisers that Antipater, guided by his evil genius, listened. He made the crossing and landed at the Augustus harbor of Caesarea. He was moved to find himself utterly alone. Everyone avoided him, and no one ventured near him. For, while he had been hated just as much in the past, now, at last, this hatred was not afraid to show itself. Many, too, were kept away by fear of the king, since every city was now full of rumors about Antipater, and the only person unaware of his situation was Antipater himself. No one ever had a more wonderful send-off than he when he sailed for Rome, or a more miserable welcome back. He now began to suspect the disasters at home, but he was cunning enough to hide it, and though inwardly dead with fear, Maintained by a tremendous effort, a haughty demeanor, there was no possibility now of running away or of getting his head over water. But he had no definite news of events at home because of the king's threats, and a glimmer of hope was left. Perhaps nothing had been discovered. Perhaps even if it had, he might put things right by brazenness and trickery, by which alone he could survive. Armed with these vain hopes, he came into the palace without his gentlemen, who had been rudely turned back at the outer gate. It happened that inside was Verus, legate of Syria. Antipater went in to his father, and in an attempt to brazen it out, went up to him as if to embrace him. Herod put his hands in front of him and turned away his head, crying, "How like a parricide to want to put his arms around me with so much on his conscience. To hell with you, disgusting wretch. Don't touch me till you have disproved accusations. You shall have a fair trial, and Verus has come at the right time to be your judge. Go and think of your defense for tomorrow. I will give you a chance to prepare some of your little tricks." Taken aback to answer a word, Antipater turned and went, and his wife and mother came to him with full details of the charges. Then, having recovered his composure, he got to work on his defense. The next day the king summoned a court consisting of his counselors and gentlemen, inviting Antipater's gentlemen to come too. Presiding jointly with Verus, he had all the witness brought in. These included some servants of the accused mother, who shortly before had been caught carrying a note from her to her son as follows: "Your father has found out everything, so don't go near him unless you can count on help from Caesar." When these had been brought in with the rest, Antipater entered and fell on his face at his father's feet. "I beg you, father," he began, "not to condemn me in advance, but to lend an unbiased ear to my defense. I shall prove my innocence, if you will let me." Interrupting him with a peremptory call for silence, Herod turned to Verus, "That you, Verus, and every upright judge will condemn Antipater as a hopeless scoundrel. I am quite certain, but I am afraid my own wretchedness will disgust you, and you will judge me worthy of every calamity for having fathered such sons. Yet, for that very reason, you ought to feel the more sorry for me, because I have been the most affectionate of parents to such foul wretches. My other sons I named kings when they were quite young, and in addition to having them educated in Rome, I made them Caesar's friends, the envy of other kings, and I found them plotting against me. They're dead, chiefly for Antipater's sake, for he was young and he was the heir, so that his safety was my principal concern. And this filthy beast, gorged with my indulgence, has poured out his swollen insolence on me. He thought I lived too long. He was bored with my old age. He could not bear to become king except by parricide. It serves me right for bringing him back to the city after throwing him out and thrusting aside the sons of a princess to make him heir to my throne. I freely admit, Verus, that I have been an utter fool. I provoked those other sons against me, robbing them of their just expectations for Antipater's sake. When did I ever show them the kindness I showed him? I very nearly abdicated in his favor. I openly named him in my will as heir to my throne, with a yearly allowance of 50 talents. I showered gifts upon him from my privy purse. When he recently sailed for Rome, I gave him 300 talents and commended him, alone of all my family, to Caesar as his father's preserver. What crime did the others commit to compare with Antipater's? What evidence was brought against them as strong as that which reveals this fellow's conspiracy? And now this parricide has dared to speak and hopes to cover up the truth again with his tricks. Verus, be on the lookout. I know the little beast, and I can guess what specious pleas and crocodile tears he will produce. This is the man who, in the days when Alexander was alive, warned me to beware of him, and not to trust my person to all and sundry. This is the man who escorted me to my bed and searched the room for any lurking assassins. This was the guardian of my sleep, my protector from anxiety, my comforter when I grieved for my dead. For my dead sons, my surety for the loyalty of his surviving brother, my shield, my bodyguard. When I remember Verus, his cunning, his hypocrisy on every occasion, I can hardly believe I am alive and wonder how I escaped so deep a conspirator. But since some evil genius desolates my house and makes my dearest ones rise against me one by one, I shall indeed lament my cruel fate, and inwardly grieve for my loneliness. But I will let no one escape who thirsts for my blood, not even if judgment finds every one of my children guilty. Some of this stuff is fun to read. Like, that was fun to read. That was cool. That had lots of gravitas. Overcome by emotion, he could say no more, so he beckoned to Nicholas, one of his gentlemen, to repeat the depositions. But at this point, Antipater, who had remained prone at his father's feet, raised his head and cried, "You, father, have made my defense for me. How can I be a parricide if, as you agree, I have been your protector through thick and thin? You call my devotion to my father a hypocritical defense? How could I, so cunning in other ways, have been such a fool as not to realize that it was hard enough to hide from human eyes the preparation of so hideous a crime, and quite impossible to hide it from the judge above, who sees everything and is everywhere present? Was I unaware of my brother's end and the terrible punishment they received from God for their evil designs against you? And what provoked me to injure you? The hopes of being king? But I was king. Suspicion of your hate? But wasn't I most tenderly loved? Fear of you on some other ground? But my care of you made others fear me? Shortage of money? And who had more to spend than I? Suppose I had been the most degraded of men, with the soul of a savage beast. Father, should I not have been tamed by your kindness when you brought me back from exile, as you yourself said, and preferred me to your many sons, and proclaimed me king in your own lifetime, and by showering on me honors of all kinds made everyone envy me?" See, that was ridiculously fun to read. That was well written, right? That was pretty good. That was pretty good. All right, so anyway. Oh, what a pity. I went abroad, opening the doors wide to envy and playing into the hands of intriguers. Yet it was for your sake, father, I went abroad. I went to fight your battles, so that Silas should not treat your old age as a joke. Rome can bear witness to my love of my father, and so can the ruler of the whole world. Caesar, who often called me a devoted son, here is the letter he has sent you. This is more trustworthy than local slander. This is my sole defense. This I put forward as testimony to my warm affection for you. Remember that I undertook the voyage against my will, knowing only too well the enmity against me lurking in this kingdom. It was you, Father, who unintentionally ruined me by forcing me to give envy an opportunity for slander. However, here I am to face the charges. I have traveled over land and sea, nowhere, coming to grief as a parricide should. But do not take me back into favor now because of that evidence, for I am convicted in God's eyes and in yours, Father. But convicted as I am, I beg you not to base your beliefs on what others have admitted on the rack. Let the fire be used against me. Let the instruments of torture pass right through my entrails. Do not spare this foul body. If I am a parricide, I must not die unracked. I mean, I gotta admit, this is definitely a way this is how you fucking argue your personal integrity, right? I would hardly, this is unless he's twisting words to the umpth degree, right? Like all this sounds pretty good, but this also, Loki can make things sound pretty effing good, which, is supposed to be the intention of what point he gets across in Lokasenna, right? Is that he makes this very, very compelling argument about what's wrong with all the fucking gods. At these cries, laments, and tears, Varys and all the rest were overcome with emotion. Herod alone was too angry to weep. He knew that the charges were true. Then Nicholas rose, and on the king's instruction began with a thoroughgoing exposure of Antipater's duplicity, scattering all sympathy for him to the winds. Next he poured out a torrent of bitter accusations, holding him responsible for all the crime in the kingdom, and especially the murder of his brother, proving that their deaths were due to his slanders. Now, is this a scapegoating, or is it pretty much the truth as far as any crimes worth mentioning in a kingdom? Like, perhaps there was organized crime not really mentioned in this book going on. See, that makes for something, makes it a little bit more interesting. Those would be good details. But perhaps there's no historical precedent or evidence for it. He further charged him with conspiring against the survivors in the line of succession. Was it likely that one who had prepared poison for his father would spare his brothers? Dealing next with the poisoning charges, he gave an orderly exposition of the sworn statements. On the subject of Pheroras, he could hardly contain himself. To think that Antipater should have turned him of all people into a fratricide, and by bribing the king nearest and dearest, filled the whole palace with corruption. After putting forward many other arguments and demonstrations, their truth, Nicholas resumed his seat. Varys now called on Antipater to make his defense, but he only said, "God is witness of my complete innocence," and remained prone and silent. To Varys sent for the poison, gave it to a prisoner sentenced to death, and made him drink it. Death was instantaneous. He then conferred with Herod in private, wrote a report of the proceeding for Caesar, and left Jerusalem the next day. The king threw Antipater into prison and dispatched messengers to Caesar to inform him of these calamitous events. Shortly afterwards, it was discovered that Antipater had plotted against Salome too. One of Antiphilus's men-servants arrived from Rome with letters from a maid-servant of Julia, Acme by name. From Acme? That's funny, but anyway. From her, the king learnt that she had found among Julia's papers letters from Salome, and was sending them to him as she wished to help him. These letters, containing the most bitter abuse of the king and the most vehement accusations, had been forged by Antipater, who had bribed Acme to send them to Herod. His guilt was proved by her letter to him, for the women had written to him in accordance with your wishes. Hold on a second. Is that a footnote? No, it's not. Have sent those letters to your father with a covering note. I am certain he will not spare his sister when he reads them. When it is all over, kindly remember your promise. When this letter was discovered, along with those forged to ruin Salome, it occurred to the king that perhaps the documents in inculpating Alexander were not genuine either, and his emotions were painful indeed when he thought how near he had been to executing his sister too through Antipater's machinations. So he decided to lose no time in punishing him for all his crimes. But as he was taking action against Antipater, he was crippled by severe illness. However, he sent word to Caesar about Acme and the crooked attempt to involve Salome. He also sent for his will and altered it as his successor. He nominated Antipas, cutting out the two eldest, Archelaus and Philip, both of whom had been slandered by Antipater, to Caesar. In addition to gifts other than money, he bequeathed 1,000 talents. To the emperor's wife, his children, gentlemen, and freed men, about 500 talents. To the rest of his own children, generous legacies in land and money. He set aside most splendid gifts as a special honor to his sister Salome. These were the amendments he made to his will. His illness was getting steadily worse, the disease having attacked him when old and despondent. He was now nearly 70, and his spirit had been broken by the dreadful troubles of his children, so that even in health the good things of life meant nothing to him. His sickness was intensified by bitterness that Antipater was still alive. He was determined that the execution should be no hole and corner affair, so must wait for his own recovery. Okay, there's, 3 pages left, right? 109, 10, so it's 9, 10, 11, 12. Yes, 3.5, basically. Good. All right, we're going to take a break right here, and then when we're back, we're going to wrap it up. It'll be real smooth. All right, so this band's a little bit new to me, but I was catching my buddy Tommy over on The Wolf and the Melody, and he covered one of their songs, and I liked it. And so this is Drudan sang. Geistersvang. Yeah, Drudan sang Geistersvang. Yeah, these guys got a killer vibe. They got a killer vibe. All right, we're back. Things are all quiet in the chat group. You know, not too many people are here tonight, but it's good to have you here. This needs to be done because it is important. All right. His sickness was intensified by bitterness that Antipater was still alive. He was determined that the execution should be no hole and corner affair, so must wait for his own recovery. In the midst of his troubles, there occurred a popular rising. There were two rabbis in the city with a great reputation as exponents of national tradition, and for that reason held in the highest esteem by the whole nation, Judas the son of Sephareus and Matthias the son of Margulus. Many young students came to them for instruction in the law. In fact, they daily attracted a host of men in their prime. When they learnt that the king was succumbing to his sickness of body and mind, they dropped a hint to their acquaintances that here was a wonderful chance to strike a blow for God and to pull down the works erected contrary to the laws of their fathers. All right? So obviously there's like, well, he's not my king, right? It's just like our king had things this way, and this king has things this way, right? And obviously they're looking at him as being out of alignment with God, all right? So, although it was unlawful to have in the sanctuary images or portraits of busts or the likeness of any living thing, the king had put up over the great gate a golden eagle. This the rabbis now urged them to cut down, saying that even if the danger was involved, it was a glorious thing to die for the laws of their fathers. For those who came to such an end, there was a sure hope of immortality and the eternal enjoyment of blessings, whereas the poor-spirited, knowing nothing of the rabbinical wisdom, through ignorance clung to life and chose death by disease rather than death in a righteous cause. So here we got that influence of the rabbis, and we're also looking at here, so they're equating any aspect of making statues, just making statues for aesthetic purposes, is unholy, according to the rabbis. So their interpretation of the first commandment about making idols is effectively a war on art. There, I said it. Okay. While they were preaching, thus it was rumored that the king was actually dying, so that the young men undertook the task with more confidence. At midday, when masses of people were walking about the temple courts, they lowered themselves by stout ropes from the roof and began to cut down the golden eagle with axes. The news quickly reached the king's officers, and who hurried to the spot with a large force, seized about 40 young men and took them before the king. He began by asking them whether they had dared to cut down the golden eagle. They said they had. Who told them to do it? The law of their fathers. What made them so cheerful when they were about to be executed? The knowledge that they would enjoy greater blessings after their death. At this, the king exploded with rage, and forgetting his sickness, went out to address a public meeting. He attacked the men at great length as temple robbers, who, pleading the law as an excuse, had some ulterior purpose and demanded their punishment for sacrilege. The people, fearing punitive measures on a wide front, begged him to punish first those who had suggested the attempt, then those who had been caught in the act, and to take no action against the rest. The king reluctantly agreed. Those who had lowered themselves from the roof, together with the rabbis, he burnt alive. The rest of the men seized, he handed over to his attendants for execution. From then on, the sickness spread through his entire body, accompanied by a variety of painful symptoms. He had a slight fever, an unbearable itching all over his body, constant pains in the lower bowels, swelling on the feet as in dropsy, inflammation of the abdomen, and mortification of the genitals. Ooh. Producing worms as well as difficulty in breathing. Ugh, this guy is turning into Nosferatu, especially when lying down, and spasms in all his limbs. The diviners said that his many diseases were a punishment for what he had done to the rabbis. But though he was wrestling with so many disorders, he hung on to life, hoped for recovery, and planned his own treatment. He crossed the Jordan and tried the hot baths of Cairo, which empty their waters into the Dead Sea, water sweet enough to drink. The doctors were decided to warm his body with hot oil by lowering him into a full bath. But he fainted and turned up his eyes as if dead. The loud cries of his attendants brought him back to consciousness, but having no further hope of recovery, he ordered the distribution of 50 drachmas a head to the soldiers and large gratitudes to the officers and to his gentlemen. By the time he arrived at Jericho on the return journey, he was melancholy, mad, and in virtual challenge to death itself. He proceeded to devise a monstrous outrage. He brought together the most eminent men of every village in the whole of Judea and had them locked up in the hippodrome. Then he sent for his sister Salome and her husband Alexis and said, I know the Jews will greet my death with wild rejoicing, but I can be mourned on other people's accounts and make sure of a magnificent funeral if you will do as I tell you. These men under guard, as soon as I die, kill them all. Let loose the soldiers amongst them, then all Judea and every family will weep for me. They can't help it. Wow. Get everyone to weep for you? Okay, Balder. Ugh. While he was giving these instructions, a dispatch arrived from his ambassadors at Rome to notify him that at Caesar's command, Acme had been executed and Antipater condemned to death. It was on to say that if his father preferred merely to banish him, Caesar had no objection. For a while, Herod felt rather more cheerful, but later he was so tormented by lack of food and a racking cough that his sufferings mastered him, and he made an effort to anticipate his appointed end. He took an apple and asked for a knife, it being his habit to cut up apples when he ate them. Then, looking around to make sure there was no one to stop him, he raised his hand to stab himself. But his cousin, Achiab, dashed up and stopped him by grasping his wrist. At once loud cries went up in the palace as if the king had gone. Antipater soon heard the cheering news, and in his delight offered his jailers a handsome bribe to loose him and let him go. But the prison governor not only put a stop to this, but ran and told the king of his attempt. Herod uttered a shout louder than seemed possible in so sick a man, and at once sent his bodyguard to put Antipater to death. After ordering his body to be interred at Hyrcania, he again modified his will, naming as heir Archelaus, his eldest son, and as tetrarch Archelaus's brother Antipas. He survived his son's execution by only 5 days. Reckoning from the date when he put Antigonus to death and became master of the state, his reign had lasted 30 years. Reckoning from his proclamation by the Romans as king, 36. Hold on a second. From 40 to 4 BC. In most respects, he enjoyed good fortune, if ever a man did. He came to the throne though he was a commoner, occupied it a very long time, and left it to his own children. But in his family life, he was the most unfortunate of men. Before the military knew that Herod was dead, Salome went out with her husband and freed the prisoners whom the king had ordered to be murdered. She told them the king had changed his mind and was permitting them all to go home again. When they were safely out of the way, she informed the soldiers of the true situation and summoned them to a joint meeting with the civilian population in the amphitheater at Jericho. Here Ptolemy came forward, displaying the signet ring entrusted to him by the king, to whom he paid the warmest tribute, followed by words of advice to the civilians present. Next he read aloud the letter Herod had left for the troops, in which he made a lengthy appeal for loyalty to his successor. After the letter, he opened and read the final will, in which Philip was named as heir to Talcanitis and the neighboring districts, Antipas as tetrarch, as explained above, and Archelaus as king. Archelaus was to take Herod's ring to Caesar, with the state documents under seal, as Caesar was in sole charge of all his dispositions and executor of his will. All the provisions of the earlier will remained valid. Vociferous congratulations were at once heaped upon Archelaus, and the soldiers came forward in companies with the civilians, pledged their loyalty and joined in prayers for the blessing of God. Then they turned to the task of the king's burial. Everything possible was done by Archelaus to add to the magnificence. He brought out all the royal ornaments to be carried in procession in honor of the dead monarch. There was a solid gold bier adorned with precious stones and draped with the richest purple. On it lay the body wrapped in crimson, with a diadem resting on the head, and above that a golden crown, and the scepter by the right hand. The bier was escorted by Herod's son and the whole body of his kinsmen, followed by his spearmen and the Thracian company, Germans and Gauls, all in full battle order. Why were Germans and Gauls there? The rest of the army led the way, fully armed and in perfect order. He headed by their commanders and all the officers, and followed by 500 of the house slaves and freedmen carrying spices. The body was born 24 miles to Herodium, where the late king's command it was buried. So ends the story of Herod. Interesting. So, I gotta know this. I gotta find out why. Okay. Whoops, not over here. Okay, why did Herod have Germans and Gauls? All right. Caesar's elite Germanic cavalry. Not the only tribal auxiliaries in Caesar's army. Okay, so these were Germanic Romans. That's what this is. Germans were armed like the bodyguards of the Roman emperor. They would have wielded spears, javelins, weapons. What was the Gauls? Interesting, right? This is very interesting to think about. So that means that there were men of the north in service of Rome that went and were part of these events, which probably explains a lot about the relationship between Jews and Germans through the Roman connections that we often don't consider very much. Okay. All right, so I think that's it. This has been a good stream. Very little activity halfway through it, but thanks again for Howard and Tim for popping up and saying hi in the chat. And I know that many of you are going to be playing catch up and getting more of these. Thank you so much. Like, share, and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the flip side.